The massive space station called Dominion's Edge floated silently in the darkness between stars. It was bigger than most moons, with metal towers stretching in every direction like the arms of a giant spider. Inside its gleaming halls, the most powerful beings in the galaxy were meeting to decide the fate of countless worlds. Admiral Hysteria stood 12 feet tall, her body made of living crystal that caught the light and threw rainbows across the meeting chamber. She was from the Vorthak Empire, one of the 12 civilizations that ruled the galactic hegemony. For 2,000 years, these aliens had worked together to expand their territory across the stars. They called it guided evolution, but everyone knew what it really meant. They found weaker worlds and took them over. The chamber was filled with representatives from all 12 member races. There were the floating, jellyfish-like Etherians, whose thoughts moved through the air like whispers. The mechanical synthetics clicked and whirred as they processed data through their quantum brains. The plant-like Verdani swayed gently, their leaves rustling with each breath. Despite their different forms, they all had one thing in common. They were predators. And today they were choosing their next prey. Fellow council members, Hysteria began, her voice ringing like crystal bells. We gather today to review targets for our next expansion cycle. She gestured with one of her 4 arms, and a holographic display filled the center of the room. Stars and planets appeared in the air, spinning slowly as data streams flowed around them. The hegemony had a system for choosing their victims. They sent out scout ships that could travel faster than light, covering vast distances in short time. These ships were invisible to most primitive sensors, allowing them to study worlds for years without being detected. They looked for specific things. Civilizations that were advanced enough to be useful, but not advanced enough to fight back. Our scouts have identified several promising candidates, Hysteria continued. But one stands out above all others. The display zoomed in on a small yellow star, with 9 planets orbiting it. The third planet from the star glowed blue and green, covered in oceans and continents. Sol 3, announced the synthetic representative, its mechanical voice emotionless. Native designation: Earth. Inhabited by a species calling itself Homo sapiens, or humans. The data began flowing across the display. Earth was perfect for their purposes. The humans had developed nuclear technology, which meant they had some scientific knowledge. They had basic space travel, with primitive rockets that could barely reach their own moon. Most importantly, they were divided into many different nations that often fought each other. Population: approximately 7.8 billion. The synthetic continued. Political structure: fragmented into 195 separate nation-states. No unified planetary government. No faster-than-light travel capability. No energy shields. No antimatter weapons. Murmurs of approval rippled through the chamber. This was exactly what they looked for in a target. A species advanced enough to have developed industry and science, but still primitive enough to be easily conquered. The humans had nuclear weapons, but these were crude compared to the hegemony's technology. Their fastest spaceships would take thousands of years to reach another star. Fleet Marshal Kethmore, a massive insectoid creature with 6 arms and compound eyes, leaned forward. What about their defensive capabilities? Minimal, Hysteria replied. Their military forces are designed for fighting each other, not for planetary defense. They have no orbital platforms, no planet-wide shield generators, and no unified command structure. Our preliminary analysis suggests they would surrender within days of our arrival. This brought more sounds of satisfaction from the council members. Quick conquests were always preferred. When a species surrendered early, fewer resources were wasted, and the new subjects could be put to work more quickly. The hegemony had perfected this process over many centuries. The Verdani representative rustled her leaves thoughtfully. Have there been any signs that they are aware of our surveillance? None, the synthetic confirmed. Their detection technology is far too primitive to spot our scout ships. They appear to be completely unaware of our existence, or the existence of any other spacefaring civilizations. This was another good sign. Species that knew about the larger galaxy sometimes tried to prepare defenses or call for help from other worlds. The humans seemed to be living in complete isolation, focused entirely on their own small world and its problems. Admiral Hysteria brought up historical records on the display. This would mark our 847th successful integration. Our previous operations in this sector have all proceeded smoothly. The Calorians surrendered after we destroyed 3 of their cities. The Thaxans gave up when we demonstrated our ability to control their weather. The Manalans actually welcomed us after we showed them our superior technology. Each conquest had followed the same pattern. The hegemony would arrive with an overwhelming show of force. They would demonstrate their superior weapons and technology. The target species would realize that resistance was hopeless and surrender. Then came the guided evolution phase, where the conquered people were slowly integrated into hegemony society as workers and servants. Fleet Marshal Keth Moore studied the tactical data. I recommend we assign this to the 3rd Pacification Armada. They have experience with similar primitive worlds. 200 ships should be more than sufficient. The council members nodded in agreement. 200 ships was actually far more than needed for a world like Earth. But it would make the display of force more impressive. The sight of so many alien vessels appearing in Earth's sky would crush any thoughts of resistance before they could form. The 3rd Armada is currently finishing operations in the Centaurus sector, Hysteria noted. They will be available in approximately 6 of their months. I suggest we begin final preparations immediately. The vote was unanimous. Earth had been selected as target number 847. The council members began discussing details like resource allocation and integration schedules. They talked about the humans the way farmers might discuss livestock, planning how best to use them once they were properly trained and controlled. As the meeting continued, Admiral Hysteria felt the familiar satisfaction of another successful expansion. The hegemony had been growing steadily for 2 millennia, adding new worlds and new subjects with each cycle. The humans would soon learn what billions of other beings had learned before them. Resistance was futile, and submission was the only path to survival. The Crystal Admiral had no way of knowing that this routine conquest would be different from all the others. She could not imagine that the primitive humans possessed something that no other species in the galaxy had ever developed. In 6 months, when the 3rd Pacification Armada reached Earth, they would discover that some prey could bite back. Dr. Sarah Chen rubbed her tired eyes and stared at the computer screen for the 100th time that day. The numbers and patterns dancing across the monitor should have made sense by now. But they still looked like gibberish. She had been the head of the SETI Institute's Deep Space Monitoring Division for 8 years, and in all that time, she had never seen anything like this. The signals had started appearing 3 weeks ago. At first, her team thought they were just background noise from space, the kind of random electromagnetic radiation that fills the universe. But these signals were different. They had structure, patterns, and most importantly, they were clearly artificial. Someone or something was broadcasting them, and the source was moving through the outer edges of Earth's solar system. Dr. Chen called her assistant, Marcus Webb, from across the laboratory. You need to see this. The quantum computer finished processing the latest batch of signals. Sarah walked over to Marcus's workstation, her coffee mug clutched tightly in her hands. She had been drinking far too much coffee lately, but sleep seemed impossible when faced with the possibility that humanity was no longer alone in the universe. The young man's face was pale, and his hands shook slightly as he pointed at his screen. I think I know why we couldn't decode these signals before, Marcus said quietly. They're not trying to hide from us. They're just using technology that's so far ahead of ours that we couldn't even recognize it as communication. Quote, the screen showed a complex web of decoded information. Numbers, coordinates, what looked like technical specifications, and something that made Sarah's blood run cold. Detailed maps of Earth, not just the continents and oceans that any space-based observer could see, but information about population centers, military installations, and industrial sites. They're studying us, Sarah whispered. This isn't just observation. This is reconnaissance. Over the next few days, Sarah's team worked around the clock to decode more of the alien transmissions. What they found was terrifying. The signals contained detailed assessments of human technology, military capabilities, and social structures. Worse yet, they found fragments of what appeared to be invasion plans. References to pacification protocols and integration timelines painted a picture of a future where Earth was conquered and controlled by these alien observers. Sarah knew she had to contact the government, but she also knew that most officials would think she was crazy. Fortunately, she had an old friend who might listen. Dr. James Harrison worked for NASA but also had connections with the Pentagon's more secretive projects. If anyone would take this seriously, it would be him. 2 days later, Sarah found herself in a windowless conference room deep beneath the Pentagon. The walls were lined with screens showing satellite feeds and classified documents. Around the table sat men and women in military uniforms and dark suits, all wearing expressions of barely controlled panic. General Marcus Hayes, a veteran of 3 wars and the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, looked like he had aged 10 years in the past week. Dr. Chen, the general began, his voice hoarse with exhaustion. What you've discovered matches intelligence we've been gathering through other channels. Project Deep-Here has been monitoring unusual activity in the outer solar system for the past month. We've confirmed that multiple alien vessels are conducting systematic surveillance of Earth. A woman in a dark suit leaned forward. Sarah recognized her as Director Patricia Morgan from the NSA. Our most advanced satellites have detected at least 15 unknown objects moving through the Kuiper Belt. They appear to be using some form of stealth technology, but their gravitational signatures are impossible to hide completely. General Hayes activated a wall display showing a tactical overview of the solar system. Red dots marked the positions of the alien ships, moving in careful patterns around Earth's orbital path. Based on their current positions and movement patterns, our analysts believe they are preparing for some kind of operation. The timeline suggests we have approximately 6 months before whatever they're planning begins. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. 6 months to prepare for contact with a civilization that could travel between the stars while humanity had barely managed to land on the moon 50 years ago. The technological gap was so vast that it might as well have been infinite. What are our options? Asked an Air Force colonel, whose uniform was covered with classified project badges. Limited, Director Morgan replied bluntly. We've run every simulation we can think of. Our most optimistic scenarios assume they want to establish peaceful contact. Our worst-case scenarios. She paused, looking around the room. Our worst-case scenarios are extinction-level events. Dr. Harrison, Sarah's old friend, spoke up from his position near the back of the room. There might be something else. Dr. Chen's team has made another discovery that we haven't discussed yet. He nodded to Sarah, who activated her own presentation on the wall screen. While decoding their communications, we found something they probably didn't mean to transmit. Sarah began. There's a flaw in their encryption system, a kind of backdoor that allows access to their central databases. We've been carefully exploring their information networks without being detected. The room fell silent as Sarah's words sank in. They had managed to hack into an alien computer system. It sounded impossible, but the evidence was right there on the screen. What we found is both encouraging and terrifying, Sarah continued. These aliens aren't just random explorers. They're part of something called the Galactic Hegemony, a coalition of 12 different species that controls this entire region of space. They've been systematically conquering and enslaving primitive worlds for over 2,000 years. She brought up a star map showing hundreds of conquered worlds, each marked with the date of its fall to the hegemony. The pattern was clear and methodical. These aliens had turned conquest into a science, perfecting their techniques over millennia of practice. Earth is designated as target number 847, Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. They've done this 846 times before, and apparently, they've never failed. General Hayes leaned back in his chair, looking older than his 70 years. How long do the conquests usually take? Sarah checked her notes. Based on their historical records, most worlds surrender within days or weeks of their arrival. The longest resistance lasted about 3 months, and that was considered unusual. The room erupted in worried conversations as military leaders began discussing defense strategies and evacuation plans. But Sarah held up her hand for silence. She had one more piece of information that would change everything. "There's something else," she said. "Something that might give us an advantage. While studying their conquest records, we noticed a pattern in the species they've defeated. Every single one of them had something in common." The room waited as Sarah prepared to share the discovery that would reshape humanity's understanding of its place in the galaxy. The information she had uncovered would soon prove that sometimes, being different could be the greatest strength of all. Dr. Sarah Chen stood before the largest gathering of world leaders in history. The emergency session of the United Nations had been called within hours of her Pentagon briefing, and representatives from every nation on Earth filled the assembly hall. Outside, military forces across the globe were mobilizing in what everyone knew was a hopeless attempt to prepare for an alien invasion. "What I'm about to tell you will change how we see ourselves and our place in the universe," Sarah began, her voice echoing through the hushed chamber. "For weeks, my team has been studying the historical records of the galactic hegemony. We've analyzed the conquest data from 846 different worlds, spanning over 2,000 years of alien expansion." She activated the main display, showing a three-dimensional map of the local galactic region. Hundreds of star systems glowed with different colors, each representing a world that had fallen to the hegemony. The pattern was clear and systematic, like a disease spreading through space. Every single conquered civilization shared certain characteristics, Sarah continued. They were scientifically advanced, having developed spaceflight, nuclear technology, and complex societies. They had art, culture, and philosophy. Many were more advanced than we are today. The Chinese representative leaned forward. If they were so advanced, how were they defeated so easily? Sarah took a deep breath. This was the part that would be hardest to believe. They were peaceful. Not just non-aggressive, but fundamentally peaceful in a way that we can barely understand. Their entire evolutionary history was different from ours. The display changed to show detailed analyses of the conquered species. The Calorians had evolved on a world with abundant resources and no natural predators. Their conflicts were minor disputes over territory that were always resolved through negotiation. The Thaxans had developed in a stable environment where cooperation was always more beneficial than competition. The Minolans had actually evolved from herd animals and had never experienced individual conflict at all. Every species the hegemony conquered came from worlds where war, as we understand it, simply never existed, Sarah explained. They had disagreements, certainly. They had competition for resources occasionally, but they never developed the concept of total war, of dedicating an entire civilization's resources to destroying an enemy. The Russian delegate stood up. "What exactly are you saying, Dr. Chen?" Sarah clicked to the next slide, showing Earth's bloody history. Images of ancient battles, medieval sieges, and modern warfare filled the screen. The assembly grew quiet as they watched footage of World War II, nuclear explosions, and countless conflicts that had shaped human civilization. "Earth is different," Sarah said quietly. "We evolved in a harsh environment where survival meant constant struggle. We developed as persistence hunters, chasing prey for days until it collapsed from exhaustion. We learned to work together in groups, but also to fight other groups for resources. We experienced ice ages, volcanic eruptions, asteroid impacts, and mass extinctions. Every step of our evolution was shaped by conflict and survival." Dr. James Harrison, who had flown in from Washington, joined Sarah at the podium. "The implications are staggering," he said. "While other species were developing peaceful solutions to problems, we were developing weapons. While they were learning to share resources, we were learning to take them by force. Our entire technological development has been driven by military necessity." The Brazilian representative shook her head in confusion. "But surely that makes us weaker, not stronger. These aliens have superior technology." Sarah brought up a new display showing human military doctrine and strategy. "Technology isn't everything. We've learned things that the rest of the galaxy never needed to know. We understand concepts like guerrilla warfare, asymmetric tactics, scorched earth policies, and mutually assured destruction. We've fought wars where entire civilizations were destroyed rather than surrender. She clicked through examples from human history. The siege of Stalingrad, where millions died rather than give up a single city. The Pacific War, where soldiers fought to the death on every island. The Cold War, where two superpowers held the entire world hostage with nuclear weapons rather than allow their enemies to win. The galactic hegemony has never faced an enemy that would rather die than surrender, Sarah explained. Their conquest strategy relies on overwhelming displays of force that convince rational beings to submit rather than be destroyed. But what happens when they face a species that isn't rational by their standards? 1. General Hayes, who had been invited to address the assembly, stepped forward. We've been analyzing their military tactics based on the historical data Dr. Chen's team provided. Their strategy is simple: arrive with superior force, demonstrate their power, and wait for surrender. It's worked perfectly for 2,000 years because every species they've encountered has been logical enough to surrender when faced with certain defeat. He brought up tactical displays showing the alien conquest patterns. They've never had to fight a real war. Their military doctrine is designed for police actions against compliant populations, not for combat against an enemy that fights back with everything they have. The French representative stood up. Are you suggesting we can actually defeat them? Not in a conventional sense, General Hayes replied. Their technology is still far superior to ours. But war isn't just about technology. It's about will, strategy, and the willingness to pay any price for victory. They have better weapons, but we understand war itself in ways they never have. Sarah returned to the podium. There's something else. While studying their communications, we've learned about their psychology. The 12-member species of the hegemony all evolved as either cooperative species or apex predators on worlds without serious competition. They understand dominance and submission, but not the kind of bitter, desperate fighting that has defined human history. She showed images from the alien databases, pictures of their home worlds, beautiful, peaceful planets with abundant resources and stable climates. Gardens compared to the harsh, changing world that had forged humanity through millions of years of struggle. They've never faced an enemy that would destroy their own cities rather than let them be captured, Sarah continued. They've never dealt with opponents who would use suicide attacks, who would fight with improvised weapons, who would turn their entire population into soldiers. The Japanese representative nodded slowly. You're talking about the concept of death before dishonor, aren't you? Exactly, Sarah confirmed. It's a concept that exists in every human culture, but apparently nowhere else in the galaxy. The idea that some things are worth dying for, that defeat can be worse than death. Dr. Harrison pulled up historical records from both human and alien conflicts. When the hegemony conquered the Calorians, the entire planet surrendered after they destroyed 3 cities. When we humans fought World War II, we kept fighting after losing entire countries. When they conquered the Thaxans by controlling their weather, the aliens gave up after a single demonstration. But humans have fought through famines, plagues, and natural disasters. The British representative leaned back in his chair, understanding dawning on his face. We're not just different. We're their worst nightmare. Sarah nodded. A species that views surrender as worse than death, that has spent its entire evolutionary history learning to fight, that has turned war into an art form. They're expecting another peaceful species that will see their superior technology and surrender. Instead, they're going to find something that has never existed in their experience. The assembly hall buzzed with excited conversations as the implications sank in. For the first time since learning about the alien threat, humanity had reason to hope. They were still outnumbered and outgunned, but they had something the galaxy had never seen before: the refusal to give up. The question now, Sarah concluded, is how we use this advantage. We have 6 months to prepare, and we need to make sure the aliens understand exactly what they're dealing with before they make the mistake of trying to conquer us. The war room beneath the Pentagon had been transformed into something resembling a television studio. but the broadcast equipment was unlike anything ever built before. Dr. Sarah Chen watched technicians from a dozen countries work together to prepare the most important transmission in human history. They had 3 months left before the alien fleet arrived, and this message would determine whether humanity lived or died. "Are you sure this will work?" asked President Rebecca Morrison, who had flown in from Washington to personally oversee the broadcast. The weight of 8 billion lives rested on the decision they were about to make. General Hayes nodded grimly. "Dr. Chen's team has confirmed that we can hijack their communication network. The signal will reach not just the invasion fleet, but every world in the hegemony simultaneously. Once we send this, there's no taking it back." Sarah adjusted the quantum transmitter one final time. The device used the same security flaw they had discovered in the alien communications to access their network. It was a one-time opportunity. Once the message was sent, the aliens would certainly close the security hole, but they would have already heard what humanity had to say. "The message is ready," announced Dr. Harrison from his position at the main console. "All major world leaders have approved the final version. We've included historical footage, military documentation, and strategic analyses that should give them a complete picture of what they're dealing with." The message they had crafted over weeks of careful preparation was unlike anything humanity had ever created. It wasn't a plea for mercy or an attempt at negotiation. Instead, it was a stark warning about the nature of the species the aliens were planning to conquer. Every word had been chosen carefully to demonstrate concepts that apparently didn't exist anywhere else in the galaxy. Sarah took a deep breath and activated the recording system. The message would be transmitted as both audio and visual data, ensuring that any species could understand it, regardless of their sensory capabilities. She looked directly into the camera and began to speak. "This is Dr. Sarah Chen, speaking on behalf of the planet Earth and the human species. We know you are watching us. We know you are planning to conquer our world. We know you have done this to 846 other civilizations, and we know you believe we will surrender just as they did." The first part of the message was simple. A clear statement that humanity was aware of the alien presence and intentions. This alone would probably shock the invaders, since none of their previous victims had detected them before the invasion actually began. "We are sending you this message to inform you that you have made a critical error in your assessment," Sarah continued. "We are not like the species you have conquered before. We are not a peaceful civilization that will surrender when faced with superior technology. We are something you have apparently never encountered in your 2,000 years of expansion. A species evolved for war." The transmission cut to historical footage. Ancient battles where warriors fought with spears and swords, their faces twisted with determination. Medieval sieges where defenders held cities for months against overwhelming odds. Modern warfare where soldiers continued fighting even when victory was impossible. "We are the product of millions of years of violent evolution," Sarah's voiceover explained as the images played. "We evolved as persistence hunters, tracking our prey for days until it collapsed from exhaustion. We survived ice ages, volcanic eruptions, and asteroid impacts that wiped out most other life on our planet. Every challenge made us stronger. Every disaster taught us to adapt and survive." The footage shifted to World War II, the bombing of London, where civilians continued their daily lives despite nightly air raids. The siege of Stalingrad, where an entire city became a battlefield, and neither side would retreat. The Pacific Island campaigns, where every landing was contested to the last soldier. "We have fought wars where entire civilizations were destroyed rather than surrender," Sarah continued. "We have developed weapons capable of ending all life on our planet, and we have been willing to use them rather than accept defeat. We understand concepts that apparently do not exist in your experience: total war, scorched earth tactics, mutually assured destruction." The message included detailed explanations of human military philosophy. The concept of asymmetric warfare, where a weaker force could defeat a stronger one through superior tactics and willingness to sacrifice. The idea of guerrilla resistance, where an occupied population could make conquest so costly that the occupiers would eventually leave. The doctrine of mutually assured destruction, where two powers would threaten to destroy everything rather than allow the other to win. Your previous conquests succeeded because you faced rational beings who chose survival over resistance, Sarah explained. But rationality is a luxury that evolution never allowed us. We are the species that chose to fight the Ice Age instead of migrating away from it. We chose to hunt predators larger and stronger than ourselves. We chose to explore dangerous oceans and hostile continents. The transmission showed more recent conflicts. Vietnam, where a technologically inferior force had defeated the most powerful military in the world through determination and superior understanding of their environment. Afghanistan, where multiple superpowers had been forced to withdraw despite overwhelming technological advantages. We do not fight because we believe we can win, Sarah said, her voice growing more intense. We fight because surrender is not in our nature. We fight because we would rather die on our feet than live on our knees. We fight because that is what our species does when threatened with extinction. The message included footage of nuclear weapons tests, mushroom clouds rising over deserts, demonstrating humanity's willingness to develop weapons that could destroy their own planet. The images were accompanied by explanations of nuclear strategy and the doctrine of mutually assured destruction. We have created weapons that can end our own civilization, and we have aimed them at ourselves rather than allow our enemies to conquer us, Sarah continued. This is not rational behavior by your standards, but it is human behavior, and it is why we have survived when other species might have perished. The final part of the message was the most important. Sarah looked directly into the camera, speaking not just to the alien fleet but to every conquered world in the hegemony. You believe you are coming to guide our evolution, to integrate us into your empire as you have done with 846 other worlds. But you are wrong. You are not coming to conquer a peaceful civilization. You are coming to fight a species that has been at war with itself, with its environment, and with extinction for millions of years. The transmission ended with a comprehensive database of human military history. Every major conflict, every tactical innovation, every strategic doctrine that had been developed over thousands of years of warfare. It was a master class in the art of war, transmitted to species that had apparently never needed to learn such lessons. We do not seek to conquer you, Sarah concluded, but if you choose to attack us, understand that we will not simply resist. We will adapt, we will learn, and we will become the nightmare that has never existed in your peaceful galaxy. We are not another species awaiting guided evolution. We are humanity, and we are already evolved for war. As the transmission ended, the war room fell silent. They had just sent a message that would either save their species or doom it. But for the first time since learning about the alien threat, Dr. Sarah Chen felt something she hadn't experienced in months: hope. They had given the galaxy a chance to understand what it was dealing with. Now they would have to wait and see if the aliens were smart enough to listen. Admiral Zex Thara was reviewing tactical formations aboard the flagship Time's inevitable victory times when the transmission began. The third pacification armada was still 2 months away from Earth, cruising confidently toward what should have been another routine conquest. The crystal being had been looking forward to adding another successful campaign to her record when her communications officer suddenly started making sounds of alarm. "Admiral," the officer called out, his voice filled with confusion and fear. "We're receiving a transmission from the target world. It's being broadcast on our secure command frequency." Zex Thara felt her crystalline form grow cold. In 2,000 years of hegemony expansion, no target species had ever detected their surveillance, let alone accessed their communication networks. The impossible was happening right in front of her. "Put it on the main screen," she ordered, trying to keep her voice steady. The image of a small, bipedal creature appeared on the display. The human called itself Dr. Sarah Chen, and it was speaking directly to them, using their own technology to hijack their communications. As the message continued, Zex Thara watched in growing horror as everything she thought she knew about warfare was turned upside down. The footage the humans transmitted was unlike anything in the hegemony's databases. Species fighting until the last individual died. Entire cities destroyed rather than surrendered. Weapons created specifically to ensure that victory would be so costly that even the winners would lose. The concept was so alien to her experience that she could barely comprehend what she was seeing. "Status report from all ships," she commanded, her voice cracking like breaking glass. The responses came flooding in from the 200 vessels of the Armada. Captains who had spent centuries conquering peaceful worlds were now faced with something that challenged their most basic assumptions about warfare. The humans weren't just threatening to resist, they were explaining exactly how they would make that resistance so devastating that victory would be meaningless. Captain Veltar of the Time's dominant Reach Times was the first to speak his concerns aloud. "Admiral, these tactics. Our doctrine has no provisions for this kind of warfare. We're trained for pacification operations, not total war." Zexthera studied the tactical displays showing her fleet. 200 ships, each capable of destroying a city with a single shot, weapons that could crack continents and shields that could deflect nuclear weapons. By every measure, they were vastly superior to anything the humans possessed. But the message had introduced concepts that made technological superiority irrelevant. Meanwhile, the transmission was spreading throughout the galaxy at the speed of light. The humans had somehow accessed the hegemony's main communication network, and their message was being received simultaneously on every world in the Empire. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. On the conquered world of Kalora, the blue-skinned inhabitants watched the human footage with growing amazement. For 300 years, they had lived under hegemony rule, believing that resistance was impossible. But the humans were showing them concepts they had never imagined: guerrilla warfare, sabotage, and the willingness to make conquests so costly that occupiers would eventually leave. Riots began within hours of the transmission's end. The Kalorians had never developed the concept of total war, but they were intelligent beings capable of learning. Human military manuals were being downloaded and studied. Peaceful farmers and scientists were suddenly asking questions about asymmetric tactics and insurgent warfare. Similar scenes were playing out across the galaxy. On Thaxa, the floating cities were erupting in demonstrations as the population demanded human military advisors to help them plan their liberation. The plant-like Verdani were experiencing their first violent uprising in recorded history. Having learned from the humans that sometimes violence was the only answer to oppression, the Hegemony Council was in emergency session aboard Dominion's Edge, but for the first time in their long history, they were paralyzed by indecision. The 12-member species had built their empire on the assumption that any rational being would surrender when faced with overwhelming force. The humans had just proven that rationality was not universal. "The psychological profiles are completely wrong," reported the synthetic representative, its mechanical voice filled with something resembling panic. "Every conquest model we have developed is based on species that prioritize survival over resistance. The humans appear to prioritize resistance over survival." Fleet Marshal Keth Moore clicked his mandibles nervously as he reviewed the human military database. "They have developed tactical doctrines specifically for fighting superior forces, something called asymmetric warfare, where technological inferiority becomes irrelevant. They have historical examples of primitive forces defeating advanced armies through superior strategy and willingness to sacrifice." The Verdani representative swayed frantically, her leaves rustling with agitation. "The conquered worlds are responding to their message. We're receiving reports of uprisings on 17 different planets. Species that have been peaceful for centuries are suddenly demanding weapons and military training." But the worst news was yet to come. The Etherian delegate, whose species communicated through telepathy, brought word of the most devastating development of all. 3-member worlds have withdrawn from the hegemony, the jellyfish-like being reported, its thoughts projecting despair into the minds of the other council members. The Zephyrians, the Luminants, and the Crystallis have all declared neutrality. They fear that association with us will make them targets for human retaliation. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. In a single day, the human message had accomplished what 2,000 years of resistance had failed to achieve. It had cracked the foundation of the hegemony itself. Species that had been loyal members for centuries were suddenly abandoning the empire, rather than risk facing enemies who fought like humans. Back aboard the Time's inevitable victory asterisk, Admiral Zexthera was facing a mutiny. Her own officers, beings who had spent their entire careers in successful military operations, were now questioning whether the invasion should proceed at all. "Admiral," Captain Veltar said quietly, "I've been reviewing the human historical data. They have a concept called Pyrrhic victory, where winning a battle costs so much that it's worse than losing. Everything in their message suggests that even if we conquer their world, the cost would be catastrophic." Zexthara examined her fleet's psychological profiles. Her soldiers were trained for police actions against compliant populations, not for warfare against enemies who would fight to the death. The humans had transmitted footage of their own people engaging in what they called suicide attacks, where individual soldiers would destroy themselves to kill their enemies. The concept was so foreign to hegemony, thinking that they had no countermeasures for it. "They've also transmitted something called scorched earth tactics," added another captain. "They will destroy their own infrastructure, rather than let us capture it intact. Even if we win, we would inherit a devastated world with a population trained in guerrilla warfare." The final blow came from the hegemony's intelligence services. Their analysts had completed their assessment of the human message, and the conclusions were terrifying. "The humans have revealed classified tactical information about asymmetric warfare," the intelligence report stated. "This information is now spreading to every conquered world in our empire. We estimate that within 1 galactic year, every subject species will have access to human military doctrines." Admiral Zexthara stared at the tactical displays, showing Earth's position. A small blue world orbited by a single moon, inhabited by beings who had never traveled beyond their own solar system. By every rational measure, it should have been an easy conquest. But the humans had just taught the galaxy something that no species had ever learned: how to make victory impossible even in defeat. The communication console chimed, indicating an incoming message from Dominion's edge. The orders, when they came, were unprecedented in hegemony history. All fleets are to maintain current positions and await further orders. The invasion of Sol 3 is hereby suspended indefinitely, pending strategic review. For the first time in 2,000 years, the galactic hegemony had encountered a species that had made them afraid to attack. The humans had achieved something that no other civilization had ever accomplished. They had won a war without fighting a single battle. As Admiral Zexthara watched her fleet hold position 2 months away from Earth, she realized that the age of easy conquests was over. The galaxy now knew about total war, and nothing would ever be the same again.